Hi, I'm Helena and I work at the MS Trust. Just a little disclaimer, we're recording this over the phone because of coronavirus and social distancing, so apologies if it sounds a little bit iffy at any stage. Please do bear with us. I'd like to welcome you to our podcast series, It's All in Your Head, which focuses on the topic of mental health and MS. And why this topic? Well, here at the MS Trust, we receive thousands of questions on the topic of mood, depression and anxiety, and a bunch of other things that belong under the mental health umbrella. In MS, we are getting quite good at treating the physical symptoms we may have, such as spasticity, pain, problems with our vision or bladder, yet we're not as good as making sure our mind gets the same care. But through this podcast, we want to change that. We want to normalize the conversation around mental health and get people talking. In today's episode, we're going to do things a bit differently. We've got my colleague Marissa from the fundraising team. And you might have heard Marissa in one of our earlier Corona podcasts, where we were talking about anxiety of being in lockdown. Marissa, like myself, has MS and is also a very keen mental health champion. Marissa is in charge of our MS Trust in Us campaign and had a chat with MS nurse Sally Fox about what an MS nurse does from day to day and some ideas around mental health and our campaign MS Trust in Us and how it ties in with MS and mental health. Let's have a listen.
I'm Marissa and I'm the Individual Giving and Legacies Manager at the MS Trust. Today, as part of the MS Trust in Us campaign, I will be speaking to Sally Fox. Sally is an MS Trust funded MS specialist nurse who works with people with MS to assist with things like treatment, well-being and symptom management, amongst many other things. Welcome, Sally.
Hi, Marissa. Nice to speak to you.
So, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself just before we dive into the topic of mental health?
Yes, fine. I work for a trust in the north of England, and as you said, I was the second nurse to be funded under the specialist nurse programme, which was amazing because my colleague previously on her own was dealing with over 700 patients. So obviously there was a significant limit to what she was able to do. So it's made our workload much more manageable, really. So it was a phenomenal thing for us as a trust to be able to do and to be able to offer, particularly in the light of increasing demands with the ever-increasing number of DMTs available.
Yeah, incredible. So yeah, it sounds like that was also really beneficial to people living with MS in that area as well. So it's a win for everyone all round.
Yeah. If you're not careful, you do end up just purely monitoring DMTs. And obviously there is so much more to supporting with people with MS than just that.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, the MS Trust in their research has found that we need at least 100 more MS nurses across the UK. So yeah, hopefully at some point we'll be able to put them all in, but I don't imagine that'll be any time soon. So can you just tell me a little bit about what the day in the life of an MS nurse looks like?
I think it's very different according to where you work. So obviously from our point of view, it's very structured. We are not allowed, unfortunately, to go out and do home visits, which a lot of MS nurses do. So the ones in our two neighbouring trusts are able to do that. Mm-hmm. The reason that we are not is just because we're able to see and speak to so many more people. If we don't go out, our patch is huge. It covers an industrial area, city centre, as well as some very remote rural patches. So if we were to go out, we would probably only be able to see one or two patients a day. So the way that our day is structured, we will spend the morning mostly sorting out things via telephone. So the morning is to respond to telephone calls coming in for people who are struggling with symptom management, perhaps are recently diagnosed and obviously still getting to grips with symptom management, what it means for them, relapse, identifying a relapse. And then in the afternoon, we used to have, seems like a distant memory now, face-to-face clinics. So again, for for 3 days a week, these would be longer appointments, so approximately 45-minute appointments, where we would deal with people with all forms of MS who are not on disease-modifying treatments, or who are on disease-modifying treatment but want to talk about something outside of that. And then on Thursday, I have a clinic with shorter appointments where I literally monitor DMT. So I will see how people are doing, take their bloods, and allow them then to be signed off on their next prescriptions effectively. So it's pretty structured, really, on a normal day.
Yeah, so it sounds structured but very varied as well in what you're kind of having to support people with. So I was just going to say, how have your days changed since COVID-19?
They've changed an awful lot in that I very rarely see face-to-face patients anymore. So on Thursday mornings, for example, I will go in to monitor people on the day case unit who are coming in for infusions of natalizumab. So that hasn't changed. But everybody else, really, we will see we will have a telephone consultation with. The exceptions to that tend to be if you do need to see somebody face to face, perhaps to look at their gait or something that's definitively changed, or if they require specialist services such as a translator, for example. So, I mean, obviously, there are a lot of negatives with that. I think people miss that face-to-face. To be honest, I really miss that face-to-face. But it does have positives as well, because it's rare that you will, I mean, you do it, but it's a lot more rare that you will spend an entire 45 minutes with somebody over the telephone, which will mean that actually very often you can respond to more people than maybe you otherwise would have done. The other thing that we are introducing, which has been very beneficial actually, has been e-clinics. So for people who are tech savvy, and to be fair, it's a pretty simple system if I can work it. You can have like a Zoom consultation, and those have been really good. And what I've found particularly beneficial is if people are starting an injectable, at one time you would see them in clinic and talk them through it, but then they were on their own. Whereas now I will actually sit down with them at a prearranged time, and sometimes that can even be in the evening, and I can be virtually there as they do their first injection, which I think has been massively beneficial. And I think that's something that, you know, even once all this has gone back to normal, inverted commas, I think that's something that we are looking to extend and to incorporate into what we can offer. I think the other thing is as well, you know, for some people who are very stable on a DMT that they've been on for years and years and years, you know, we had been dragging them to clinic once every 3 months, once every 6 months, depending. And now we're reviewing that. Is that really good use of our time? So we're looking at doing either a telephone or e-clinic with them, which they can maybe do from work. They're not having to take time out of work, and then we can send them a blood form. So there have been positives in that we've done things because we've been really busy and we haven't had time to look at them and change them. And this has kind of forced us into a corner, if you like, and we are reviewing the most efficient ways of working, both for us but also for patients.
Yeah, and I'd never even thought about people who might need a translator or someone who might need someone with them. So obviously lots of upsides, but it does sound as if it has made a huge difference for some of your patients. And not just looking at their attendance within a hospital, but how do you think COVID-19 has impacted the lives of your patients with MS just in general?
I think it's been mixed. I think there's been a lot of anxiety around the workplace, and people's susceptibility to COVID. And I think an awful lot of that has been because, to be fair, at the start, none of us knew what we were dealing with. And, you know, GPs were sending out letters to people with MS. There were standard letters saying you're at extended risk. So there was a lot of anxiety about people being at work, people having children who were at school, people shielding when they didn't need to shield. I think we're getting much clearer on that. We've got much more definitive guidelines on that. So we are able to reassure patients while, you know, making them aware that although they're not at any more risk of COVID, unless they've recently had a stem cell transplant or alemtuzumab, or possibly cladribine, but that if they do catch COVID, obviously it is going to give them a flare. But there was a lot of anxiety around that and around, letters that had been sent out. I think also people who choose to isolate, as a personal choice, and a lot of people do, although they think they're coping with it okay, I think the isolation can be quite insidious. And, I can talk to somebody and they'll say, no, I'm fine. And I can think, well, I spoke to you in January and you sounded very different. And because incrementally it's crept up on them, they're maybe not as aware of it. So I think anxiety, if I'm honest, has been the major thing.
And I was kind of going to ask you if you've seen any negative impacts on the mental health of any of your patients, but I feel like you've covered that a little bit. So I'm just going to go a bit deeper and kind of ask, do you think if someone is anxious, that has a negative impact on their physical symptoms, on the MS itself?
Oh, most definitely, yes. Because if you think about it, if your neural pathways are damaged, your brain, to a large part, can compensate for that in many cases. So it can use different neural pathways to get the signal to where it needs to be. But that takes an awful lot of energy. Now, if you're stressed, you're probably secreting cortisol. Again, that can be quite detrimental over a longer period. Your body has to be selective about what it uses that energy for. So if you're using that energy to be anxious, to be stressed, your heart rate is probably going to go up, your respiratory rate is probably going to go up, your blood pressure is going to go up. When your body's faced with all of those physical factors, it's going to deal with what it perceives to be the most immediate threat, which is all of those things. So it probably isn't going to be as successful at getting signals through in a different way. So you're likely to get surges in things like electric shock type symptoms, pins and needles, neuropathic pain, all of those things. And that's quite a natural physiological response, really.
So it does sound as though, for a lot of people and some people with MS might not find any of this daunting at all, any of COVID-19, but for some people, obviously it can have a huge impact on their mental health and therefore on their physical symptoms as well, which I don't know if a lot of people understand that is how MS works.
Yeah, and I think, it's something that I do. Again, going back to the positives, we are able to be more reactive about this. And you're right, there are some people who are taking it in their stride, and that's fine. And there are some people who maybe you wouldn't normally. There are some people who you're always aware that anxiety is there at the background. They're probably very open about it themselves. There are some people who hide it more successfully, but that's when you start thinking, all this sudden surge in physical symptoms probably has a more psychological origin. And it's about tracing it back, really, and going through it with them. Because again, obviously we've talked about worries specific to MS. People with MS are also subject to the same worries. They may have loved ones who are ill, they may have work instability, which I know Helen Ford over in Leeds has done a lot of research in this. Work instability can be more prevalent in certain groups of people with MS anyway, and she's looked at factors that have improved that. But obviously at the moment, that's a very heightened threat for an awful lot of people with or without MS. So, there are an awful lot of things outside of the MS, outside of the perceived risks of COVID, that are adding to anxiety as they are in the general population. People with MS aren't immune to that.
Yeah, it's very intersectional worry, very intersectional.
Yes, absolutely.
So what would be your advice for anyone living with MS who may feel as though their mental health has declined since the pandemic began?
I think there are certain techniques that can be very helpful. I think one of the key things, and I know we always go on about this, I'm sure you've all had this conversation with your specialist nurses, is about keeping hydrated. Because, that has been linked to cognitive decline as well as low mood and things like that. So that's really important. But techniques such as reframing can be very helpful. So if you are very internalized and you are very concerned and you become more anxious about your personal situation, which is a very normal reaction, try and open out a little bit. So try and look at the bigger picture, the grander scheme of things. So, for example, if you see somebody and you think they've answered you, they've been a little bit short, instead of thinking, why have they done that? Why have they done this? Why have they done the other? Look about, what could be going on in their lives? Are they anxious about something? Is their job at risk? So techniques such as that, trying to look at the bigger picture. I think that's easier said than done. And I think, a lot of the techniques that you would use to do it form the basis of cognitive behavioural therapy, where you will replace a positive thought with a negative thought. Very difficult to do at first, but in some ways the brain is like a muscle. So the more often that you do it, the better. And I think closely linked with that, and again, there's been a lot of research on this, is gratitude. So at the end of the day, kind of thinking about the positives. We all find it very easy to reflect on the negative aspects of each day. But try, before you go to bed, to leave yourself thinking about what have been the positives of this day. What have I learned from it? Who have I met that I've enjoyed? There will always be something, even in the darkest days. And the more you look for the positive in things, the more you can actually shift neurochemically your mindset, which is a vital thing. I think for anxiety, a really, really good tip is scheduling. We would always look at this for fatigue management for people with MS anyway. Do you need to delegate it, dump it, delay it? If not, do it. We would always suggest that. But, even making lists, I'm a fanatical list maker. What do you need to achieve from every day? And don't just think about work or, housework or whatever it is that you need to do. But think about, is there somebody who always makes your life better? Scheduling a phone call with them, for example. Scheduling a walk outside, which again is known to have a very positive effect on mental health. But I think the more that you've got a list of the things that you need to achieve, and maybe make the list in the morning or at the time of day when your mind is clearest, then it doesn't matter if the brain fog descends, because you've got it there and there isn't that anxiety of, I'm sure I should have done something, but I don't know what it was. So, you can circumvent it that way. I think there's a lot more emphasis on breathing these days. And there are a lot, if you go onto YouTube, there are loads of different methods of breathing, from like Wim Hof to all these, box breathing, where you breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4. And again, all of those things are designed to actually slow down your fight or flight response, so you can actually lower your blood pressure, lower your heart rate, and consequently lower your rates of anxiety by doing that. So there's box breathing, like I said, in for 4, out, hold for 4, out for 4. You could breathe in for 3, hold for 4, out for 5. There are lots and lots of different ways, but again, that they can really help to eradicate that, manage that, manage that stress response. And it's something that you can do very quickly wherever you are. There's nothing so urgent that you can't just take a couple of seconds to just breathe yourself down. And again, the more obvious techniques such as mindfulness, which is rooting yourself in the moment. So whether you're eating, for example, you can really pay attention to what you're eating. How does it feel in your mouth? What does it taste like? How does it feel as it moves from one side of your mouth to the other? And again, all of that will take you away from stress response and internalize it a little bit, so that it just gives you that mental break.
That all sounds incredibly helpful, Sally, and I'm sure all of your patients greatly appreciate those tips. And the one thing that I'm hearing as you're saying them is that it does sound like these aren't quick fixes. They're things that people will have to work at and kind of learn how to use these methods to relieve anxiety. But I wonder if even going through the process of learning how to use those methods, so creating a routine of writing down anything that you're grateful for, or remembering to do the breathing exercises, that in itself can make someone feel as though they're achieving, I imagine. So you're actually working on something and moving forwards instead of feeling slightly helpless. I don't know if that's something that you found.
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think things like breathing, that is a quick fix, because, you know yourself, if you breathe in deeply and then out deeply, and regulate it, that brings things down very quickly. But you're quite right. And I think the other thing is, finding a passion. It might be, I don't know, needlework. Personally, I'm learning to play the piano. Wow. I haven't played the piano since a child. But it's just something in which you can completely lose yourself. And again, that relates back to mindfulness. If you are so absorbed in something that you are losing yourself within it. And again, it takes a little bit of time to get to that level of skill with anything. So any new skill that you're learning, you are actually forming new neural pathways, which obviously, if existing pathways can be damaged, is a really beneficial thing. And I know there's been an awful lot of research into diseases like Alzheimer's, and the idea that doing Sudoku, learning a new language, anything like that that uses a different bit of your brain can be incredibly helpful in fending off things like that. And again, for MS, again, from a mental health point of view, we all need that sense of purpose, I think, because I think for a lot of people that's been lacking for a very long time.
Definitely. Yeah, and all those tips sound as though they would give you a sense of purpose, something to aim for, even if it's learning mindfulness or, writing that gratitude journal or learning a new language. So that sounds amazing. And as you might know, the MS Trust in Us campaign, it is raising funds to further educate MS health professionals like you about mental health so they can support their patients with the most up-to-date information. So obviously you know loads about mental health, and I'm sure every other health professional will as well. But do you think it would be beneficial to have a refresher, to be taught more, to almost have a kind of recap of everything that you already know, and then hopefully learn additional information so that you can pass that on to your patients?
Oh, most definitely. I think it's so important. I mean, you will always approach things from a certain angle. And to be fair, I will listen to a lot of podcasts and things like this on mental health, or not even mental health, but, sort of good living, if you like. And there are loads out there, whether it's Happy Place, whether it's Feel Better, Live More, that sort of thing. So you can do that kind of thing yourself, but you will only be able to approach it from your angle, if you like. Now, obviously, the more that you research yourself, the more that will open out. But I know even just going to regular MS Trust conferences and courses, somebody else will say something and you'll just think that's brilliant. Why haven't I thought of that? And then that's something else that you can take away and you can build on. So I just think it's so valuable, because I think, mental health, I'm delighted to say I think there's becoming a massive focus on it. 10 years ago, even, people were very ashamed about mental health. You wouldn't admit to any kind of interruptions to your mental health. For me, mental health and physical health are very much interlinked, as we've already discussed, particularly with MS, but, for all sorts of things. And let's not forget, MS doesn't protect you from anything else, unfortunately. But, there's links between mental health and things like irritable bowel syndrome, migraines, all manner of things. So I think it's absolutely vital. I think it's important that we talk about it. I think, without putting too fine a point on it, I think probably at the time of diagnosis, possibly at the time of an alteration in diagnosis, people with MS can sometimes, hopefully less as the treatments improve, but can sometimes become quite despondent. So you are having to deal on a day-to-day basis sometimes with people in a huge amount of distress. And, it's all very well saying, oh, well, this is a mental health thing, go see your GP, go see this, go see that. At that time, they are talking to you. And I think it's vital that you are able to support them at that time. Hopefully signpost them to other places as well, where they will have a superior skill set. But you need to be able to deal with that at the time that somebody discloses. And people will disclose all manner of things to you, and you need to be able to respond to that. And I think also to debrief, which, for us is really important, because, your team of people as well. We get to know people over a very long period of time. And if it's somebody that you know well, who is very distressed, obviously, that has an impact on you. And it's important to be able to go through it with others and say, well, did I deal with that in the best way? And maybe reflect how you could have done it better. I just think it's so important. And again, going back to sometimes if people's mood has been deteriorating slowly over a long period of time, it's up to you to pick that up sometimes, because they may not have done themselves. They may see it in physical terms. And again, the more education that you have around that, the more efficiently you are going to be able to do that. And let's face it, the consultants, certainly in our trust, don't have time. They have 10 minutes with a patient, 20 absolute maximum. It comes down to the nursing team.
Definitely. And I know that MS nurses and MS health professionals, they are seen as superheroes within the MS community. There is no doubt about that. But as you've said, there has to be that distinction between, you aren't technically their mental health professional, you will be signposting, but as you said, at that time, the more knowledge you have about mental health, the easier it is to support your patient if you're the one that they're talking to in that minute.
And I think all the information that we can have around developing active listening skills and, encouraging people to open up, motivational interviewing techniques, I probably kind of emphasize an awful lot of the more extreme end of what we do. But, if you're going to use motivating people as part of mental health. So if you have been anxious, if your mood is a little bit low, even if you're just a bit despondent about a diagnosis, it's really important that we are able to come in and motivate people and infuse them and say, it's possibly the end of the world that you thought you had, but it's not the end of the world. It's not going to kill you. Let's get together and let's build a new life from this. We need to be able to motivate people in equal measure as well. And that's, for me, a mental health thing in a similar way, although, obviously you probably wouldn't refer that person at that point to a healthcare professional. But, I see our role as kind of confidant, cheerleader. You have to be able to do all of those things. And I think the bigger the toolkit that you have to help people address all these different issues,
that's really touching, Sally, and your patients are incredibly lucky to have you, I'm sure. And I'm just wondering if there is anything else that you came to say, anything that you wanted to add about mental health and people with MS, whether that be about COVID or not, or do you feel as though we've covered everything that you wanted to add?
I think we've covered a lot of it. I just want to say, don't be ashamed of mental health. It's always been there. It's just that we've never spoken about it. I think people with MS do have periods where they are more prone to disturbances in mental health. And there are so many reasons for that. It might be organic damage, although that's very difficult to pin down. It might be an element of mourning for the life that you thought you had. All of these things are normal, natural reactions. It's really important not to be ashamed of them. It's really important to address them, whether that's with a healthcare professional, whether that's with a close friend or a family member. But it's, it's something to work on, and it's not something to be ashamed of. And everybody, whatever their background, whether they have MS or not, all faces these challenges. It's not just you. There is help out there. There are people that you can talk to. And I think the hardest thing, and from what a lot of patients have said to me before we've got into quite heavy conversations, is this is really difficult for me to say, and you need to tease it out of them. But then when they've spoken about it, it's just those first few words that are the hardest, and then it gets easier. Just plunge in, just do it, just talk to somebody.
That's amazing, Sally. Like I said, it sounds as though your patients are really, really lucky to have you. And I've been really lucky to have you on the It's All in Your Head podcast with me today as well. So thank you so much for coming and talking about MS, COVID-19 and mental health with me. And hopefully I'll get to speak to you soon.
Now, if this was a commercial podcast, here is where there should be some adverts. But as we're a charity, we don't do that. But we'd like to take this opportunity to tell you about our website, which is filled with information about MS and mental health. There's a fantastic A to Z that will cover topics such as depression, mood swings, anxiety, and lots of other useful things. Go and have a browse for yourself at www.mstrust.org.uk.
This episode of the It's All in Your Head podcast has clearly shown the need for people living with MS to have additional mental health support. MS Trust surveys have shown that 72% of people living with MS feel anxious or depressed for more than several days a month, and that was even before the pandemic. Life is still more difficult for people living with MS, with delays in healthcare services, a lack of access to life-changing treatment, and potential isolation from lockdown and the pandemic, a donation from you could fund more MS healthcare professionals and mental health education for these professionals in NHS hospitals. This can ensure people with MS have access to the support they need, not just with treatment and with community care, but also with the mental health support and signposting that specialist healthcare services can provide. We need to act now. If you would like to make a donation to the MS Trust in Us campaign and support people with MS and MS healthcare services, please visit www.mstrust.org.uk/trust-in-us-donate. Thank you.
Hello, I'm back. It's been very interesting to hear about what Sally and Marissa had to say. I liked all of Sally's tips about finding a hobby to lose yourself in. Now, I'm a very keen baker myself, and currently I'm trying my hand at mastering puff pastry. It's a bit messy, but I really like it, and I do tend to just lose myself completely in it. I also liked what Sally said about not being ashamed about your mental health. Those first few words are the hardest, but once you've made the first step to talk to someone, it will get easier to do so. It was also interesting to hear about getting MS nurses to focus more about mental health. I'll ask Marissa back on the podcast in the future to tell us how it's going with the campaign. Right, that's it from us. Now remember that if you have any questions about MS, we're here for you. Our inquiry service is available from Monday to Friday, except UK bank holidays, from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And you can email them at ask@mstrust.org.uk or call 0800 032 3839. Thank you. Bye.